This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. Dispatches is also supported by the public affairs firm O'Donnell and Associates. For more information, check out o'donnellsolutions.com. Gianaris and daughter. I think that's the move.
There's a place down in the city called Russ and Daughters. They have excellent, excellent brunch fare, kind of like Jewish deli food.
Mm-hmm. And you'll have more free time to spend
Apropos,
there.
apropos of nothing, Dave, but you mentioned someone and their daughters doing stuff.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out, and he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
I'm David Lombardo, and this is Dispatches from Planet Albany, a podcast about power and politics in New York State government. On this episode, we're doing our exit interview with now former Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris, a Queens Democrat who chose not to run for re-election this fall and officially resigned his seat in early August. He needs no introduction, so let's get on with the show. Well, as soon as your retirement was announced, there was a lot of discussion about the many hats that you wear in your day-to-day life. So can you walk us through what the Mike Gianaris experience was like, especially in, say, an election year, because you have those political roles as well as those government roles. Was there a regular day, and how busy was it?
I mean, my job was really like 3 big jobs and then a couple of spin-offs from that. So I had, of course, perhaps most important was my district office responsibilities and making sure that people I represent who continue to elect me were satisfied with the representation and were getting services. So that was a whole piece of it that, on your show, we don't even talk about that much because you're Albany focused. Then, of course, there was the session responsibilities, which had multiple pieces to it. And then there was the campaign committee side. So depending on the time of year, depending on whether the year ended in even or odd number, any one of those jobs would percolate up as being the busiest or the most important at the moment. But it varied, which is what made it interesting, but also incredibly time-consuming.
Well, what does it mean to be Deputy Majority Leader, for example? Obviously, you have the things you do in public, like run the Rules Committee, but there's probably a lot that we don't see behind the scenes. So what are some of those aspects?
Well, the role of deputy has very little to do with what the statute or the rules say the responsibilities of a deputy are. It depends heavily on the relationship with the leader and what pieces of the governing pie the leader wants to delegate to that person. So you look up statutes or the rules of the Senate, it'll tell you the deputy sits ex officio on every committee and has certain responsibilities that relates to that. And so what does that mean? It means I got to roll into any committee meeting and sit there and, and ask questions, I suppose. But that was kind of the least of what I was able to do and what I was asked to do. Being floor leader is something that traditionally has followed the deputy, but it's not required anywhere. That's just kind of the way it is by practice. Running the Rules Committee, same thing. There's nowhere that it says the deputy has to do these things. But my relationship with Andrea Stewart Cousins was so strong, and that has a lot to do with the history and how we got here, that she was comfortable giving me all of these roles to play. And I think it worked out because, look, the relationship between a leader and deputy, or in the assembly side, between the speaker and the majority leader, is so important because we've seen in the not too distant past that when that relationship is competitive as opposed to complementary.
Who had a competitive relationship?
Oh, I think you go back to the last time the Dems had that brief foray of power, and whether it was Jeff Kline and John Sampson and Malcolm Smith and Pedro Espada, like they were all at each other's throats at various points in their tenure, and you saw the kind of discord that came from that. Doesn't have to be that way. Of course, that was a particularly difficult math to work with. They had a one-seat majority, so it was a tough job by any circumstances, but made that much harder if everyone's not pulling in the same direction.
Well, thinking about Jeff Kline as a deputy leader, he was somebody who clearly envisioned himself as the future majority leader if he could just put together the right coalition. And you, though, seem to be able to check your ambition. There wasn't necessarily this infighting, at least that I'm aware of. So was that something that was difficult? Did you feel like you had to kind of settle into the deputy majority leader role?
No, I mean, like, you got to remember the history here. Andrea and I, when we were in the minority, from when Andrea first got elected to be leader of the Democratic Conference, we did this together. It's kind of a project we partnered on, and she was the lead, and I was the deputy even before I was the deputy. And so it was just a natural course of events that we worked as a team. I had no problem supporting her. I think she's a terrific leader, continues to be. Really one of historic significance now. If you look at how long she has been there, the things she's accomplished, I was just proud to be part of that team. If opportunities present themselves, we always try and look to advance. But I'm perfectly comfortable with the role I played in what this conference was able to achieve, and absolutely comfortable serving under Stuart Cousins' leadership.
If there had been a clear path to a job promotion, whether it was Senate Majority Leader or State Attorney General, do you think you would have stuck around? Do you think you would have maybe put in a few more years, or do you think you always were destined to retire in 2026?
It's hard to say because I was looking at the board that was in front of me when I made this decision,
Sure.
and those opportunities were not there at the time. And as I get older, I realize that years are at a premium. So when I was younger, you could say, "Oh, I'll wait 3, 4 years and then maybe get a crack at doing this job or that job." But I'm 56 now. I have a 2-year-old. I have a 92-year-old mom across the street. I have a 12-year-old at home. I've got a lot of responsibilities here. And you fast forward 4, 5, 6 years, all of a sudden your kids are growing up, and you missed some important time with family, and it was not something I was willing to wait around for.
Well, did you have any conversations with either Attorney General James or Majority Leader Stuart Cousins about what their future plans were before you decided to pull the pin, so to speak?
I don't discuss with the Attorney General much about hers. I mean, her ambitions are her own, and I wouldn't presume to kind of ask her when she's leaving, so I might take a crack at it. It's a little bit presumptuous, but the leader and I talk all the time about all the things, and so it wasn't so much a specific conversation of what are you doing? I'm trying to decide, but I just know where her head is at because we have not just a working relationship, but a personal one, and so. Like I said, it wasn't so much an interview about her plans, but I would just know because I know.
Well, thinking about what might come next in your conversation with NY1, you cited that, one, you know how government works, and you've got years of relationships, which to me sound like the making of a great lobbyist, especially considering you left office before your term officially ended, so you get an early start on that lobbying clock. So are you looking to get into government affairs, or am I off the mark?
I mean, we'll see. I do not have much interest in being a traditional lobbyist. No offense to all my friends who do that. But before I got elected to the assembly, actually before I went to work for the assembly, I was a lawyer in private practice. And that rat race of hustling clients and making sure you keep your clients, and you lose a client, you got to gain a client, and trying to poach clients from someone else. And that business is not something that would be the kind of less stress environment I'm looking for. My skill set is in either being a practicing lawyer or in the relationships and knowledge I've built around government. And so obviously that's part of the conversation I would have with anybody, but I'm not looking to open up, Gianaris and partners and, try and get 50 clients and spend my time roaming the halls of Albany.
What about the political itch, though? I think about where my career might take me, and I think about the things that I really enjoy doing, and I imagine you really enjoy being involved in politics, thinking about politics. So is there a way to scratch that itch in the future if you're not head of the DSCC, if you're not an elected official, or do you just have to go cold turkey?
What are those things you enjoy, Dave, that you think about?
One, I like attention, so I think it would be tough for me to be behind the scenes for like an elected official again. I want to be recognized, and
I like that. Dave.
So
like
that's the tough thing that
you
I have to
should
think
you should
about.
run for office.
but I also don't like talking to everyday voters, so that's a
Well,
a
that's a
challenge.
problem.
Yeah.
That is a problem. I think, look, as you know, Senator Mayer is now the chair of the campaign committee, but she has asked me to stay on. So I have been, I can assure you, very involved in the DSCC's activities since I've taken on more of an advisory role to Senator Mayer. And in fact, I've got to get on some calls with her later today. Um, and so I get to scratch that itch by maintaining involvement in many ways a house that I helped build, and so that feels good. But I'm comfortable with the idea that it's time to kind of put that chaotic lifestyle behind me. And it really, some of my colleagues kind of juggle family life and young kids and what we do up there. And God bless them. I found it extremely difficult. And I found it impossible to do both things well as I would like for me. And so, I was really faced with a choice. And for me, turning my attention to family, turning my attention to home in ways that I've never done before, because my whole life was government and politics for as long as I can remember. Um, it was the right thing for me to do.
Well, I want to come back to something you mentioned in your very first answer, which is this idea of being responsive to your district. And we've seen politicians who take on leadership roles who kind of lose touch with their district. I think Congressman Joe Crowley might be an example of that. Yet you were always cognizant, it seems, of the interests of your district, where it was shifting, maybe politically. And I'm curious, to what extent has your district, whether it's in the Assembly or now in the Senate, shaped your political priorities, and how much of that has been maybe your own political changes? But I mean, have you had to be very responsive to your district in a way that maybe moved you
of
personally
course.
first?
Well, I mean, that's the interesting part of the question. Of course, I have to be responsive. Everybody does, or they will get voted out. Like, we're not here to impose our will on the people we represent. We're here to reflect the people we represent. And I think what was easier for me, and it's just I was kind of in a unique ideological space over a 25-year period, that I was able to kind of do all of that. And when I first got elected, I replaced Dennis Butler in the Assembly, who was one of the more conservative majority members in the body. He had something, I don't even know if they still call it that. It was called the Butler Amendment. They would put up every budget vote
Sure.
to deny funding for Medicaid funding for abortions. And that was his priority. And so when I got in there, I was far, far to the left of the representatives of the district. It was Dennis Butler, it was George Honorado, who was one of the votes against gay marriage. And I think it was Peter Vallone, the father at the time. And so I got elected, and I was the kid from the neighborhood, which I think gave the people in the area comfort that they kind of knew who I was. But I was kind of like, oh, there's that kid from the next generation. He's got wacky ideas, but we trust him, right? And so I was able to be in office when the district was very, very different. And then things kind of migrated over time, but I sort of stood still, let the district come to me. And then I think in the last few years, the district got even past where I normally would be. But by focusing on the things that I had in common with the people I represent over those years, I was able to both maintain my integrity and my belief system, but also be responsive to the people I represent. I think part of that was by the time in the Senate, when we were in the majority, my status and my position in the Senate helped a great deal because I was a valuable ally for, say, the DSA members who at that point represented every other office around me. But we had worked together on issues that I was able to advance in the Senate. I joke with the mayor now that they would say to him, he only passed 3 or 4 bills or whatever it was into law when he was in the Assembly. They were all mine. They were ones that I carried in the Senate.
You're the bus pilot guy.
Well, the bus pilot wasn't even its own law; it was part of a
Part of
budget.
the budget.
But, we did a handful of bills together, and so he's obviously incredibly accomplished and doing a great job in his first year right now. But it's interesting that I think I just was in a unique place over time, and one of the skills I think I had politically, when you talk about the art of politics instead of the science of politics, is I was able to see around corners, I think, very well. And I think I saw the movement coming before most and recognized that it was real, not just a lot of people who dismiss the DSA types like to wave their hand and say, "Oh, it's just young kids on TikTok or whatever." But anyone who does that is in denial. I mean, this is something that people on the ground who are not socialists or DSA members are responding to for a reason. And I tell people this all the time. I said, if you don't recognize that and be responsive to everyday people who are concerned about gross inequality, who are concerned about their kids having to live at home into their 30s, who are concerned about not being able to get a college education without being in debt for the rest of your life, and do something at the policy level, they're going to continue to see success because that's what people want. And so this knee-jerk reaction from some Democrats that we don't support tax hikes, for example, is like a 30-year-old trope, going back to when Bill Clinton was president, which I think was a mistake our party made, and exacerbated the problem. But we should be embracing tax hikes. It's incredibly popular. People want it. By the way, independents and Republicans want it. Like you talk about raising taxes on the wealthy to provide services that people need, and it's a broadly popular idea. Now, where people get distrusting of it is if they believe it'll stretch beyond just the wealthy who can afford it, and reach middle class and working people. Yeah, then you'd have a problem. But broadly speaking, raising revenue from people who have it at a time of historic wealth inequality is a very popular idea, and I think our party should be embracing it more.
Well, since we're talking politics, let's talk about the politics of 2018 when the Senate Democrats took the majority in a big way, going from, I think, 31 seats to 39 seats, and then bringing Simcha Felder on board as well for 40. Is there anything special in terms of the ingredients that the Senate Democrats put together that year, or do you just thank God for the first term of President Donald Trump?
And I think you're subtracting the IDC primaries
Sure.
from that year as well.
Sure.
So really, we came from, I don't know what the number would have been.
It's 15. It's 15 members change seats. You had,
so
you had
it's
7.
probably like we were at 25 or something like that.
But you guys, they came on board. You guys were all part of the Senate Democratic Conference at that point.
Yeah, that was funny. I think what we did in 20, I've thought about this a lot. Obviously, it's a pivotal moment in my political career, and what we did that was incredibly intelligent, I think that worked, obviously, and it starts from the primaries, is 2018, remember, was 2 years after Trump first got elected. And people were in the streets, people were flabbergasted this could happen. And remember, that was very unexpected at the time. And so the politics of the nation were at a place where people didn't really expect it to be. And there was more engagement in the political system than there had been in a very long time. Now, most of that was focused on national events and congressional elections and that sort of thing. What we did here that worked incredibly well was we channeled that into local and state elections. And how did we do that? We engaged with federal people who, we had a fundraiser that Keith Ellison, who was chair of the National Party at the time, came to and condemned the IDC at one of our Senate Democratic fundraisers. Nancy Pelosi spoke out against it. Our congressional delegation spoke out against it. And that raised an awareness where you had groups like New York Indivisible at the time and others that decided their focus that year was going to be retaking the state Senate. That didn't have to be the case. If we didn't do what we did, I mean, I was personally in town halls in these districts. Like, you go into someone else's district and have a town hall condemning their elected official. That's kind of a big protocol break.
Sure.
as it relates to your colleagues. But we figured that, our backs were against the wall at the time. That was after Senator Peralta jumped ship. And people like you were asking if the IDC would have more members than the regular conference at that point. And so we rolled up our sleeves and said, there's really not much choice to finesse this right now. We've got to go for it. And so, I had my district office protested by supporters of one of the IDC members. It was just all out street battle at the time. But it worked out in our favor because we were able to get kind of that bigger attention on what we were doing. And, the IDC became something. I was traveling to other states and people were talking to me about it at these NCSL conferences and what have you. So that was the thing we did that really was able to channel the energies in our favor, because it wasn't just taking the majority. It's great that we did that, and November was a great success also. But had we not settled the internal battles going into that, we'd have had a hell of a time conferencing and governing when we got that majority. We were able to come in with a head of steam, a majority with a cushion, a unified Democratic conference, and that's why you've seen both the success we had and the longevity of the majority.
So you feel, based on what you're saying, like the enthusiasm you generated for those primary races where you were taking on the IDC members spilled over into, say, those other areas on the Hudson Valley and on Long Island, for example?
Yes, we were able to make the case successfully that a majority Democratic legislature, both houses, but the assembly wasn't in question, in New York was important to combating the national environment.
Sure.
And it started with the primaries, but then it did spill over. Now, a lot of what happens in November generally is just, top of the ticket kind of cascading down. But our races are won and lost at the margins. We have members that are winning their races by 1 or 2%. All the work we put in at the DSCC and the candidates themselves and their campaigns, if you move the needle 5%, it's a pretty successful campaign. It's very hard to deviate off the top of the ticket too much. But that 5%, maybe 6 or 7% in a real, extreme case, makes all the difference when you're winning races by 2 and 3%. We've been very good at that. If you look back at how many close races there have been for the Senate and who has won them, that's where the record of the DSCC has won. You could really put a gold star on.
But I imagine there's still somebody from 2018 on election night where you were like, now who's Kevin Thomas, or like who's Jim Gordon? Okay, it's Kevin Thomas.
That's the one. I was just telling. I was in a meeting, DSCC meeting, as it turns out, last week, and I said, all my time, over a decade of doing this, there's maybe one time when somebody won an election with a majority of the votes, and we had nothing to do with it. We didn't fund them. We didn't engage in that race because we didn't think it was winnable. We didn't have the resources to stretch that far, and it was Kevin. And the funny thing about Kevin is our election night party that year was on Long Island in that district in Garden City. So we're sitting there. We got a big board on the wall. We're tracking all the races. We didn't have Kevin Thomas's race on the board, but he was there physically because where else would he be? That was his district. And so halfway through the evening, somebody, might have been Todd Kaminsky, somebody just comes up and says, "Hey, I think Kevin Thomas might win." And we all scrambled to put that one up on the board, and sure enough, he ended up pulling it off. But other than that, there's not a lot of surprises for us when it comes to election night.
Well, I want to come back to the government side of things. And in your quarter-plus century in elected office, is there anything that stands out to you as a unique Mike Gianaris accomplishment? Because obviously you can point to all of the things that, say, the Senate Democratic majority was able to pass that was stymied by the Republican majority. But I have to imagine a lot of that gets done whether Mike Gianaris is in that seat or other generic Democrat. So is there something in particular, though, where you're like, this is something that I fought for, this is something that I am, proud of, and it's a unique Mike Gianaris accomplishment?
I'm going to avoid talking about Amazon in this answer because that's been beaten to death, but that certainly is something that would not have happened without my role in it. I would say it's an interesting question. Probably the one thing that's like a niche Mike Gianaris thing would have been the animal issues, and particularly the banning of the retail sale, dogs, cats, and rabbits. As it turns out, we added into the law. But we were the first state in the nation to do that. And it used to be common that you'd walk down Main Street and there would be a window and the puppies would be jumping up and down in the window, and they look cute enough. People would go in and get their pet. But what they don't realize was how sick a lot of these animals were, the environment in which they were bred, because they were being treated like commodities. And the puppy mills that generated them are awful, sometimes out of state. And so that was something that would not have happened, I don't think, without my involvement and engagement, something I'm really proud of. I think we've taken a huge step towards a more humane society and prohibiting that. Now people can either adopt or they can still go to responsible breeders and buy direct from them. But this middleman, which sells animals like they're cans of soup on the shelf, is out of the picture, and I'm really proud of that.
Are you going to set Assemblymember Linda Rosenthal up with a new Senate sponsor for all of her animal bills in the future? Make an introduction?
She's gonna have to find one. I know Monica Martinez is a huge animal lover. In fact, in her first go around the Senate, she was the chair of the animal welfare committee that we had set up. But I know she has a broader portfolio than just that. It's not something I have to do anymore, Dave. So I'm
Nope.
sure they'll figure it out for themselves.
Well, I want to come back to the Amazon of it all, though, because you mentioned being able to see around the corner, and I think your opposition to that project seems especially prescient now based on what their developments have looked like around the country. But was there ever a moment where you're standing up to this project, standing up to what the governor wants, what a lot of business interest wants, and where you were like, oh my God, what if I'm wrong? What if like this actually is really good? I'm going to pay a consequence for this, and Amazon's just going to be a great company, and people are just going to be spitting on my grave. My name's going to be mud in the future.
I didn't have to imagine that happening. I was being told that that was going to happen
Did you ever believe
every
it?
day. Look, once I made a decision to commit to fighting it, that was really it for me. Nothing kind of shook my belief in that position, but there was a tremendous amount of pressure, obviously, to do that. Much of the mainstream political world thought it was the greatest thing ever, and um, it was a battle. I mean, you go back and you'll find quotes from the governor at the time saying the Senate Democrats have just ruined their majority. Of course, we're here 7 years later, still going strong, and he's not. So that tells you all you need to know. But in retrospect, it was the right thing to do. And what I'm really proud of there, because a lot of people could have stood on a street corner and shaken their fist at Amazon. A lot of people did, and that was all helpful to build kind of the showing of grassroots opposition. But I was able to use all this knowledge and all these years I had in government really came to the fore as part of that exchange. And it went back to me from my time in the assembly. And I remember when Mayor Bloomberg at the time wanted to build a West Side Stadium. He was trying to woo the Olympics and get the Jets back in New York and all that good stuff. And what ended up stopping that was that Shelley Silver and Joe Bruno and this obscure group called the Public Authorities Control Board stopped it in its tracks. And everyone's kind of like, what is this thing? And how did it do that? And then they moved on. But I never forgot. And then when this thing rolled around, I realized that that was kind of the pressure point that gave opponents leverage over this proposal. And it coincided with us taking the majority. I asked, and the leader agreed to nominate me to sit on this board, and that was kind of what started the pivot in the conversation and the expectation about whether this project would go forward. So, had I not been around 20 years earlier to watch that happen, who knows how that would have turned out.
Your understanding of the legislature, I think, speaks to this changing of the guard that we are seeing right now in the Assembly and Senate, where you're bringing in a lot of new faces, a lot of first-time candidates. Your successor didn't know how many Senate districts there were in a video she posted. But I wonder whether you think this is an actual problem, or if it's not a problem, will impact the operations of the legislature moving forward if you've got people who come in and say, I don't know how this works, but don't care how you used to do it because I want to do it this way.
Yeah, I actually think that's refreshing. I mean, yes, people should know how many senators there are in the body they're about to join, but on a practical level, does that impact their ability to propose bills and move them through the process? No. And she'll figure it out pretty quickly. She probably already has on that particular
Yeah.
question. But
She's
but
never making that mistake
I
again.
I've always thought, and it's funny coming from me who's been around so long, but I've always thought the problem with Albany is it's insular and it lacks freshness. And that's changed a lot the last few years because the turnover has been pretty significant in both
Sure.
houses. When I was coming up through the assembly, oh my God, you had to wait 15 years to get a committee chair assignment. It was just nobody moved. And now there's a lot more of that. And I think I've always been unopposed to term limits in the long sense. I think, in the city council, they have 8 years. Like by the time you figure out what you're doing, you're already gone, or at least looking for another job. I don't think that's terribly helpful. But I think like a 12 or even 16, 16 is a lot, but maybe like a 12-year limit makes a lot of sense because you get there, you have enough time to learn your way around and have an impact, but also then you're turning it over enough to give people with new ideas a chance to not just do things because that's the way they've always been done. And I think that churn is important to a vibrant legislative body.
Well, finally, you are responsible for one of my favorite LCA show rebuttal videos, this bit you do where you're trying to build up some steam for independent, nonpartisan redistricting. And my favorite part of the video is I think you're pretending to be calling the governor, and no one's actually picking up, or they're not connecting you, and you have to pretend in front of Liz Kruger and Kevin Parker that you're really on the phone with somebody and really making accomplishments.
I'm sorry, Senator. He's not available. I will give him your message.
Listen, I'm sitting here with two other senators. We have three duly elected representatives in New York wanting to speak to our governor. I have to demand that you please...
What's going on, Mike?
You want to take your call?
Governor, thanks for picking up. I'm glad we could connect.
Anything stand out from that whole filming process? Because I really enjoy it, and I would just love to have any more insights.
That was fun. By the way, it's on YouTube if
Yes, it
anyone
is.
wants to go find it.
We will link to it in the show description.
Beautiful. What I enjoyed was all the cameos that we had. We had a bunch of senators. I think Senator Dana Squadron, former senator, did a great one too. But we went well beyond that. We had Mayor Koch, who was the champion of redistricting, and it was kind of in his final years, but he was agreeing to be part of this comedic performance. Former Governor Patterson, former Senator D'Amato. We crossed party lines on this one. We had. And we got our friends at New York One to give us the studio and Era Lewis to kind of help with the bit. Zach Fink, I think, was part of it. I mean, we just had like this whole. It was like an SNL skit with all the cast that we had in it, and I think each bit was very funny, including where I think we had Jose Peralta kind of in my living room at the end because at the time the punishment the Republicans were exerting on me was that they were taking my house out of my own district and putting it in his, and so we made a funny bit about that. But it's worth a watch. Only a few minutes long. People would enjoy it.
Anything
We'll
get
give it
cut from that?
Second life here as part of your show. What's that, Dave?
Did anything get cut from the video? Is there anybody who thought they were going to be part of this amazing video and it ultimately didn't make it on the cutting room floor?
I think we had everybody in it who we filmed.
Okay.
Susan Lerner had a great role also. There was a point where I was given
she claps.
a speech about how redistricting is the most important thing the world has ever seen, and the only person in the audience was her. It's very funny. It's interesting if you watch that. We're deep into the weeds now. But I banged the podium and the sign on front of it falls. I don't know if it was a Senate sign or just a redistricting sign or whatever it was. That was just accidental, but it worked so great with the bit that we left it in there. It was fun. It was fun to do, and it lives on. So hopefully people enjoy it. Now that was, we're still fighting the redistricting battles, as you know. That was
taken on a different bent now.
Yeah, that was 3 iterations ago. That was when the Republican majority would team up with the Democratic majority in the Assembly and screw both minorities. And so we were fighting to kind of change that process, and now it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, I don't think that Senator Gianaris would recognize maybe the fight that you're looking to make in 2026.
Well, look, it's a different world, and we didn't have a situation then where Texas and Florida and these other states were being so blatant about what they were doing to squeeze political advantage out of these lines. When we were in a vacuum, yes, New York should be as fair as we can be, and we still should be fair as long as everybody else is being fair. But now that we're in hand-to-hand combat for control of Congress and other states are playing dirty, I think we would be tying our hands in an unfortunate way if we didn't give ourselves the flexibility to respond.
Well, we've been speaking with former Senate Deputy Majority Leader Mike Gianaris. He's a Queens Democrat still, though. Senator, thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure, Dave. Thanks for having me.
And if listeners want to take a trip down memory lane, we've linked to Senator Gianaris' LCA show video in the episode notes. And a reminder that we're rapidly approaching our 200th episode, so send us your questions or comments that we can address on the air for that spectacular episode. Until next time, though, podcast adjourned.
Jose?
Hey, Mike, Yasu, welcome to Astoria. But what are you doing here?